The Utah Jazz decided that 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 1, and they might be right. It's next on Locked on Jazz. Pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps and on YouTube. Please follow the programs. We also have the daily newsletter. That is for free at lockedondaily.com. Utah Jazz. Sign up for the Locked on Jazz podcast. Thank you to the everydayers who join us each and every day. I appreciate you so much. You are the core of everything that we are at Locked On. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, here's what we're going to do on today's show. Usually I tell you in reverse order. Today I'm going to tell you in order because it'll make some sense. We're going to explain the trade the Jazz made. Then, as you may recall, if you're an everydayer, last year I went through 15 years of NBA data and valued every pick. So in a vacuum, we're then going to analyze the value of the picks that the Jazz traded to figure out what the pick the Jazz got has to come out to be for the Jazz to be able to win this trade. Then we're going to remove ourselves from the vacuum and look at actually what these picks actually mean to the Utah Jazz and their value. And then we're going to look at what kind of a future play is that's super interesting. And they're actually one the Thunder have going for them as well right now. So that's the plan for today's show. And then if we have time, the Thunder, wow. Oh my gosh, prepping for the Thunder. They're crazy. So the Utah Jazz traded their first round pick in each of the next three trades. So here's what the Jazz did. The Jazz traded the lesser of their first round picks in the 2025 draft, 2027 draft, and 2029 draft of the Cleveland, Minnesota, Utah picks. Okay? Does that make sense? So the reason that's mentioned is there's the 2027 Laker pick. The 2027, yeah, I was just wanting to make sure I was right. 2027 Lakers pick that the Jazz have, that's not involved here. So, for example, next year in 2025, the Jazz, as of right now, if there was no lottery, the Jazz would pick second. The Timberwolves, I think, pick about 14th, and the Cavaliers will pick 30th. And the Phoenix Suns will get the 30th pick of the draft. In 2027, Utah, Cleveland, Minnesota, whichever team is the best and has the worst pick, that will go to Phoenix. And in 2029, the same thing is true. That's the wild card year in this probably. Though Minnesota is protected, it doesn't matter because there's no chance everybody's going to be in the top three. The worst pick goes to Phoenix. In 2031, the Jazz now get Phoenix's unprotected first-round pick. Okay, so it's really creative. I'll give a tip of the hat to both Josh Bartelstein, James Jones, and the Phoenix Suns, Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, and the Utah Jazz. It's super creative. It's beginning to be, it's happened a few times now. It allows Phoenix now to play around and try to move some picks and do some things and have some more value pieces on the trade value. And the Jazz, it allows them to maximize value that was beginning to lose value. And we're going to get into that in the second segment. That actually might be the most important piece of all of this. As I tried to line up this show for you today, to make sure this made sense, I am kind of banking you listen to the whole thing to get the whole picture. So I appreciate if you do. Because I think the second segment's actually going to be the single most important segment to why the Jazz do this trade. So I broke down the value of picks. Kevin Pelton has a chart. I did it last year. And if you recall, and we could probably get a little more sophisticated on this, but the idea was that an MVP is worth 10 points. You draft, you get an MVP caliber player, it's worth 10 points. A top 20 player is worth 7 points. So really a top 10 player is 10 points, top 20 is 7. A top 50 player was worth 5 points. A starter was worth 3 points, a rotation player 2 points, and a borderline player 1. The logic is that a MVP is 2 times the value of a player that ranks between 20 and 50. And an MVP is probably 3.5 times the value of a starter and 5 times the value of a rotation player. It's kind of made it up, but like that was the concept. A top 20 player is 2 times more valuable than a starter, so it's really a top 10 to 20 player, and is about 50 to 70% more important than a 20 to 50 player. Top 20 players are a big deal. So that's the value. We looked at 2020 through 2007, 13 years of the draft. And after the 15th pick of the draft, the average player, the average pick value is 1.1. 1.1. Borderline NBA player is the average value of a pick after the 15th pick of the draft. 10 to 15 is a 2.4. 6 to 10 is a 2.3, so you're on average getting a starter. Which really means that sometimes you're getting a bust and sometimes you're getting a top 50 player and sometimes you're getting a starter. The 1.1 means that really in every other draft, when you draft 15 or below, you're getting a rotation player. You miss once and then you get a rotation player and it comes out to 1.1 average. It's the value of picks, in my opinion, from my data, from 15 on is pretty equal. Like, there's not a major dip here. That was probably the most revealing thing in this research. The lowest pick value, 15 through 30 or 16 through 30, is actually the 22nd pick. It comes in at 0.8. And of all weird things, the highest value is the 27th pick, which comes in at 1.9. But that's coincidence. That's just randomness. There's not a big variety here. The average on picks 16 through 20 is 1.1. The average on picks 21 through 25, 1.1. The average on picks 26 through 30, 1.2. So let's just go with that. 15 and below, your chances are you're getting a rotation player once every other draft. Your pick value is 1.1 on our scale. What the Jazz have done, in all likelihood, is traded 3 picks that are 15 or below to the Phoenix Suns. We know that this year is going to be 30. In all likelihood, Minnesota, Utah, or Cleveland, one of the 3 in 2027 is going to be a playoff team. And then that you become 15 or below. And there's not a big variety there. It's hard to wrap your head around, but just go with me on that. And the question really is going to be in 2029, there's a chance that all 3 of those teams are bad. And then Phoenix gets a nice win in 2029. So, but to be bad, they have to be really to make a difference. There's a chance. There's a chance that all 3 of those teams are picking in the top 15 by 2029. Minnesota's a little rocky. Who knows with Cleveland what happens by then? And we'll see where Utah is in the progression. There is a chance. But in all likelihood, the Jazz just traded 3 picks with a value in our system of 1.1 point trade pick value. So the Jazz, to get equal value, need to get a starter. With the pick, at least a starter. If that third pick goes between 5 and 15, then the Jazz really have to get a top 50 player to get equal value in this deal. So if the Phoenix Suns in 2031, when the Jazz have an unprotected pick, if the pick comes out to be a top 5, point value is 4 on average on top 5 picks, massive win. If it ends up being 5 through 15, the pick value is like 2.3, 2.4. The Jazz have to get a starter. That's a pretty good chance of getting a starter. But actually on pick value, the Jazz come up short. And if the Jazz end up drafting 16 through 30, Phoenix really overwhelmed them in pick value. Just in pick value. So that's why this is, from a Phoenix standpoint, when they look at the value on the table, it's a pretty good deal for them. So why would the Jazz make a deal where they trade 3 for 1 and the pick value, at least according to this analysis, is probably pretty clearly in Phoenix's advantage? It's for 2 reasons, and they both make a lot of sense on why the Jazz would make this deal, even if the analysis of the pick value says the Jazz have to kind of get a starter or above to make the pick value worth it. I'll explain as we continue here on Locked On Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by Intercap Lending. That's our friend Steve Carter over at Intercap. Intercap is a lending company that is mortgage company that's shaking things up, making home loans accessible, straightforward, and personal. Whether you're buying a first-time home, refinancing, or exploring options as a veteran, Intercap is there to guide you. What makes Intercap so great, frankly, is their people-first approach, and our people-first approach for you is our own dedicated loan officer, and that is Steve Carter, and that is awesome. Steve Carter's been with us, I think, for 7 years now. The reviews are endless and awesome. Time in and time out again. And Intercap is underwriting turn times are still still about 24 hours, where most banks are 4 to 7 days. Intercap is still keeping 60% of their loans in-house. What review today? Do I do Tim? Highly recommend Steve. Was phenomenal, very thorough. He made every experience very easy from beginning to end. People at Intercap are winner. From Paul, Steve was amazing. We moved out of state. He handled everything with ease. It couldn't have gone any better. Communication was a priority, helping ease our anxiety. Thanks, Steve. Steve Carter, Intercap Lending. He's our own personal loan officer. You can email me at dlock09@gmail.com. That's dlock09@gmail.com. And I will arrange for you to have a VIP meeting with Steve. If you don't want me in your business, call Steve at 385-800-8528. That's 385-800-8528 for Intercap Lending. Today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. I don't think they want me to be singing their jingle because I don't think that's their jingle. Nonetheless, it's time to go to live events, whether it's music, theater, basketball, hockey. It is Game Time. The energy, the excitement, they're all unforgettable, and it's awesome. And Game Time makes it even easier to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. I love Game Time because I get the seat view, I get the toggle on pricing, I now get the super deal and the Game Time features. It takes care of everything I need. I know I don't have to go look at other apps. And the all-in pricing makes it easy for me to make the decision of whether that's the ticket I want to buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps, as well as on YouTube. Thank you so much. Make sure you get the ultimate one-stop NBA daily newsletter. It's at LockedOnDaily.com, and we want to make sure that you get it, and you get everything. What Katie Heindel writes the national story, Josh Lloyd writes the fantasy thing, and I'll write a Jazz piece for you each and every day at LockedOnDaily.com. Sign up for the Jazz newsletter. All right, so why would the Utah Jazz make a trade that, when we do the analysis, says, hey, if you don't get a starter, which means it's probably got to be a top 15 pick, You gave up more value than you got. Well, there's 2 reasons why. 3 reasons why, really. Let's discuss what the value for the Utah Jazz is in their 3rd and 4th first-round pick every year over the next few years. So right now, the Jazz have 7 players on their roster that are 23 under. Walker, Cody, right? You got it. Well, we've got to find out about them. We've already, frankly, made a trade where we traded Ochai Agbaji because I think we decided that Bryce Sensabaugh was a better chance to making it long term. We can't add 3 players on the roster next year that are all 20 years old. We just can't. You can't have 10 of them that are 24 and under. So the 3rd pick, which is Cleveland's 30th pick this year, pick value's low. We're going to get a great pick with our player. We're going to get a good player with Minnesota's. Those 2 need time. How would we possibly for that player? 2027, we already have 3 picks. We have the Lakers pick, the Minnesota pick, the Cleveland pick, and our pick. It's a pretty good bet that either Cleveland or Minnesota is going to be better than the Lakers. And even then, frankly, let's watch with the Lakers. If they're good, if they somehow find something to figure this out, I think it's unlikely with their ages. But if they do, that's too many picks. So for 2025 and 2027, honestly, the picks weren't a burden, but they were decreasing in value pretty quickly for the Jazz. They weren't picks that we wanted to use to pick someone, and they weren't picks that were seemingly going to be able to go get us big game hunting, nor is the world lining up for us to big game hunt. And at some point, like this trade deadline in regards to the 2025 pick, you had to start moving your assets. Accumulating all these draft picks is awesome, but there is a point in time where you have to start to move them or do something with them. You cannot draft all of them. So this consolidation by the Jazz, while I just gave you this big chart on point value, for the Jazz, some of that point value is decreased because the chances of that player being able to kind of be successful in the Jazz system with that many young players was pretty low. I mean, unless you really just hit a crazy flyer in a draft, but that's not likely. You got to play the odds of likelihood. So that's the first thing here from the Jazz standpoint, is that while I just gave you that whole analysis, at some point we have to move picks and move assets, because you just can't be adding 3 young players in 2025, 4 young players in 2027, 3 more young players in 2029. Again, 2029 is far enough out that that's the risk. And that's what Phoenix is going to play, is like, hey, that's our value proposition. Yeah, it's 30 in 2025. We kind of know that. We don't know where it is in 2027, and 30 in 2029, it might be good. But even then, by 2029, let's say, for example, that the best case scenario for Phoenix happens, which is Utah, Minnesota, and Cleveland. None of them are in the playoffs. If we're not in the playoffs, it's because we're still young, still developing by 2029, which is possible. And we would already have 2 top 15 picks, right? By definition of this trade, if Phoenix is getting a 13th pick, well, then we've got 2 of the top 12 picks. We don't need the 13th at that point, right? If Phoenix gets a big win somewhere in this trade, which shuts the value way over to their side and says, well, that's a great trade for Phoenix. They fleeced Utah on trade value because they got a top 15 pick. It means the 14th pick. The Jazz had 2 of the top 13 picks in that draft already. At some point, it's just too many players. There's really only 9 players that can get playing time. We certainly hope Cody Williams is getting playing time. Isaiah Collier, all these guys, until at some point we have to flush them out too, as we're adding these pieces. But if you look at next year, you would certainly hope that we have, in ideal world, Cooper Flagg, Isaiah Collier, Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, a recovering Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler. I forgot someone. Kyle Filipowski. I forgot someone else on the roster. Like, your 8 or 9-man rotation next year is likely all kids again. I mean, really all kids next year. Right? Like, if I guessed Isaiah Collier, Keontae George, Cody Williams, Cooper Flagg, Walker Kessler, Bryce Sensabaugh, Kyle Filipowski, Lauri Markkanen, and a second draft pick is your 9-man rotation. Could be, very well. So, and by the way, if you're really worried about assets, if the Jazz trade one of their players this year for a 2025 second-round pick, which I don't know if they will, it would be the same thing as picking 30th to some extent, if it's a decent 2025 pick. That's probably a stretch. So the pick value for the Jazz is way lower than the charts I was just talking about. And that's the number one reason why this deal makes the most sense. Because that is a fact. Is that the pick value for the Jazz is lower than that chart. And the chances of that third, fourth draft pick in 2027, third draft pick in 2029, getting a chance and being limited. Here's the other play. You're hoping that by 2031 we're good. You're actually hoping by 2029 we're good too. And at that point, let's look at Oklahoma City right now. Oklahoma City is really, really good. Their chance of adding talent on their roster via the draft, via their picks, is over. Limited. Not over, but limited. Right? They're supposed to pick 29th this year. But they have Philadelphia's pick, who has lost 7 in a row, is an absolute dumpster fire. That pick is, by the way, protected, I think, 1 through 9. So there's a chance that they, maybe not. Maybe it's not. Knowing Oklahoma City, it's not protected. I thought it was. They now get Philadelphia's pick this year. That's the game the Jazz are playing. It's protected 1 through 6. And that is a similar trade. They took Al Horford and Danny Green's money from Philadelphia, sat on it, and got what now looks like it's going to be a top 10 draft pick for it. We took Phoenix in a time of crisis, gave him 3 picks that didn't have a lot of value for us for a 2031 pick. And the hope is that in 2031, we're really good or getting there, and we're not going to get anything through the draft anymore. And so the way you do that is then with other people's picks. And that's the real value of this deal. Is that as we grow and get better in 2031, if we're good and our pick's 25th, there's a chance this pick from Phoenix is 10th or 11th or 14th, but it's better than what will be in 2031. And that's really where this trade becomes a win for the Jazz. It's not if the 2031 pick becomes a top 10 pick and you hit it out of the park. If the 2031 pick is better than the Jazz pick at that time because the Jazz have gotten good, then this is a win. So it's a really, really creative, interesting trade. On paper value, I would say Phoenix got the better of the deal. And then when you dig in to the backside of it and figure out what the actual value of those picks is for the Utah Jazz, well, then it makes sense why the Jazz would make that trade. And then when you look at the long-term progression of where the Jazz may be in 2031, it makes even more sense and has a chance for a big win. On the other end, if Phoenix puts this thing back together, they're the 24th pick in 2031, then the Jazz probably gave away more than they got back. But again, would they have been able to do anything with it? And really, at that point, it's would they have been able to trade for better than a 2031 unprotected? I doubt it. And Phoenix is in a pretty perilous situation. All right, prep for the Thunder. Oh my gosh. I don't know why we're even kidding about it. They may be the only ones that matter in this league right now. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Jazz. The Oklahoma City Thunder's defense is absurd. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is insane. So the Thunder defense is the number one defense in the half court, the number one defense against spot ups, the number one defense pick and roll, the number one defense against the pick and roll ball handler, the number one pick and roll defense against the roll man, the number one defense against ISO, and the number one defense against handoffs. It's the number one defense against sideline out of bounds. It's the number one defense after a make, the number two defense after a miss, and the number two defense after a turnover. It's not that. It's that when you suddenly go to compare them compared to the rest of the league, it's not even close. So it's one thing that they're just better than everyone else. The other thing is that they're in a different stratosphere than everyone else. So their defense allows, I'm going to use round numbers here, just to round it up. 104 points per 100 possessions. The league average is 114. They're 10 points better defensively than any team than the average team in the NBA. The second best, they're blowing standard deviations. Their second best team in the league, remember they're a 104, is a 109. They're 5 points better than the next best team, 10 points better than league average. Everyone else is 5 points to league average. They're 10 points to league average. Their defense on the pick and roll, and these numbers are small, but if you start thinking about there's 50 or 60 a game, it gets less than small. They allow 0.86 points on a pick and roll. The next closest is 0.90. So if there's 60 pick and rolls in a game and they're 0.04 points better than everyone else in the league, that's 2.5 points a game better than the next best team on defense every night. The league average is 0.96. They're 0.1 better than the league average. If there's 60 pick and rolls, that's 6 points a night. That's insane. It's not even close. I will say, I've said this before, what's really interesting to me about the league right now, for all the complaining, it's got to be the healthiest it's ever been in the sense of competition, because we have the best offensive team and the best defensive team of all time. And if we look at all of the best teams, they all play dramatically differently. All right, so pick and roll doesn't work. So let's go play a little isolation against the Thunder and see if we can spread them out. Well, you got no chance here also, because they have about 5 individual defensive players that are the best there are in the league, and the league average on isolation defensively is a 0.96. The second best team in the league is a 0.88. And the Thunder are a 0.82. They're 0.14 points better than the average in isolation defense. All right, we're going to spread the floor and we're going to drive it against the Thunder. Well, the league average is 1.00. Easy to remember. And the Thunder are 0.92. It's crazy. Absolutely bonkers. And frankly, the other part that's bonkers is Shai. He's taking 7 shots at the rim a night, 74%. He takes 5 floaters at 50%. He takes 4 mid-range shots at 53%. He drives 21 times a game, which is the most in the league, and he's the best there is at it. And he shoots 60% 28% on his drives. He passes on 37% of his drives, which is a lot. Cade Cunningham passes on 30%. Trae Young passes on like 44%. He's special. But it's enough that you got to deal with it. He averages 1.19 points per drive. Actually, Jason Tatum's better. He runs the 10th most pick and rolls, and he's the 4th best. Only Darius Garland, Jamal Murray, and Tyrese Halliburton are better. It's nuts. Their isolation defense, Cason Wallace allows 0.82 points. Jalen Williams allows 0.59. Shai averages 0.68. And even Isaiah Joe, who's not supposed to be a good defender, averages 0.82. And then if Shai wants to play isolation offense, he's a 1.10. And we just did the league averages of 1. It's incredible. They're bonkers good. Jazz may see Lauri Markkanen and John Collins tonight, look like on the injury report. Jazz and the Thunder tonight. Interesting, really creative deal by the Jazz. Hopefully we broke it down well for you and correctly. Have a great day. Thank you very much. If you don't follow me on socials, DLock09 on all of them. Please follow me on your preferred social network. And follow us on YouTube or on your podcast app. And finally, and lastly, newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com and subscribe to the free newsletter and get it in your box every day. Now we send you the first ever national 24/7 NBA channel on YouTube, Locked On NBA, or check out Game Night every night after all the games on Locked On NBA. It's Game Night.